Okay, so my DAW of choice is Reaper. It allows us to do some really exciting things with multi-channel sound and with programming our own effects, as you're going to see quite shortly. However, there are a few issues with it, particularly in terms of when it loops audio. So you're going to hear me probably having to restart sometimes as different tracks go out of time with each other, which is a little bit frustrating. And my memory of Logic from many years ago, when I used to use it, is that it was always absolutely rock solid in terms of that kind of timing. But Reaper has some exciting things in it, and also what I wanted to do in this session is to keep it to things that could be done for free. Now, Reaper isn't free, but it does have a very long evaluation period, and Ben Eyes, our studio manager and department technician, has done a brilliant job of securing free licenses for us during the pandemic. And once the pandemic is over, $60 is not that much to pay for something which is as well featured as Reaper. Anyway, I'll stop talking and I will just play you through this sort of little 8 bars that we've got going here. Okay. Okay, I can hear a couple of glitches here in my headphones, which might be to do with sound card syncing, etc. And I'm sure this is the same for all of us, when we're in production situations, we don't usually share our sound card with other applications such as Zoom and that kind of thing. So you may hear some glitches, and I'm sorry about that, but that kind of comes with the territory of doing and broadcasting this stuff live. Now, you might be listening to this and thinking, well, you know, it's a pretty basic 120 BPM excerpt from a house tune. It's got a kick drum. It's got a clap sound in some reverb. It's got a sort of pad sound with a kind of rhythmic element to it. Bass line, all right, okay. Pulse sound. That noise, okay, kind of a hi-hat sort of thing. A very spread, very decorrelated rhythmic stereo thing going on with some spectral movement and a kind of a sort of a percussion part, sort of shaker kind of thing. Or it doesn't sound much like a shaker, but it's the kind of thing that would typically be played by a shaker. Okay, so far, so not very unusual, I would say. However, all of this was created, all of that audio I have generated from this recording, which is about 150 years old, and it sounds like this. That's it. Everything that you can hear in this comes from this. Hence the title Scrap Heap Challenge, because I've done a few of these with friends of mine in the past. And back in the pre-pandemic days, when you were allowed to go into shops, one of the things that we used to do was to allow ourselves to go into a charity shop and spend £5 on whatever vinyl or CDs or even DVDs they had, and to scavenge them for audio and try and use the audio in the weirdest and most wonderful ways that we could. So we are confined at the moment because of the pandemic, so I went over to the Smithsonian Library website. That's an American museum where they have lots of full fat, and by full fat I mean WAV or FLAC versions of old recordings. So this is a recording of someone saying the word barometer. Barometer. So just play it once more. Okay, you can probably just about make that out. Actually, I'm being slightly untruthful. I have also used this image of a barometer from around about the same era that the recording was made. I've used this image as well to create some of the sounds which are contained in that audio item. Right, so how on earth do I go about doing this? And I suppose the reason that I've done this is that I wanted to show you how you can go about creating pretty much any sound from any sound. And a lot of the time that boils down to breaking the sound down into its fundamental elements. So we will start with the kick drum, and I'll explain to you how that was created. So I'm going to solo the kick, and I'm just going to play it on loop, and then I'm going to open up the effects chain, and I'm gradually going to turn things off, okay? And so that will reveal, once I've turned all of the effects off, that will reveal the underlying sound that is being used to create this kick drum. Now the time adjustment, that's not doing anything, that's just trying to help Reaper keep its different tracks in time with each other. So don't worry too much about that one. Okay, now you may recognize that sound type. Let's just go and zoom in and see what it is. There it is. One sample at a non-zero level. In fact, it's at full level. That's +1 in DAW, floating point mathematical language. 1.0. The biggest amplitude negative sample you can have is -1. So that's it. I've used one sample, and from that, and I'll now build it back up again, I've been able to create a kick drum. It's perhaps not the greatest kick drum in the world ever, but it's not bad. So let me re-solo that. We'll play it again. Okay, so the first thing is I apply some EQ to it, and a really serious EQ. You may be familiar with impulses because we use them with convolution sampling reverbs to create an impulse response. And the idea of an impulse is that it's the shortest sound possible. It lasts for one sample and no longer. So at 44.1 kilohertz, that's 23 microseconds, around about. It therefore, theoretically, and those of you that have studied audio assemblage with me in the second year and have done audio signals with me on the MA, and those of you that are in the first year who are going to be coming into the second year, this is what you'll be studying next year. One of the things is that an impulse contains equal energy at all frequencies. That's why we use it to measure things, to measure the sound of resonators, because if we can excite every single frequency, then we can understand how the resonator responds to every single frequency. So we can turn that around and we can say, okay, so if we have an impulse and we set up a resonance, then we can excite that resonance with the impulse. So the first thing that I do with the EQ, and I have really got some pretty astonishing settings here. The first thing I do is I create something really peaky and really resonant around about the frequency that I'm interested in, and in fact I've got it set up just above 100 hertz. Okay, so that has the effect of creating this kind of ringing effect. Now any filter, any EQ will ring. Okay, so we have the impulse applied to the EQ sounds like this, but that's a bit too high, so I'm going to use a pitch shifter to pull it down. And the pitch shifting settings are that I've just pitched it down an octave. This is using one of Reaper's built-in plugins. Then I want to compress that. I want to shape it because it's too flabby at the moment. It's too boomy and ringy. So what I'm doing with Recomp is I've got a very high ratio, and basically what I want to do is and in fact, I'm letting a little bit of the sound through with this particular attack setting. So I can use the attack to control how much of the sound goes through. Then I gate it. Okay, now we're starting to get a bit closer to a kick drum. Now, this is where I ummed and ahed about whether I should use this, because I like making things from scratch, and I like people being able to understand how to make things from scratch. DAWs, they're ubiquitous. Lots of people have got them, lots of people use them. Lots of people, though, can't really get beyond using plugins which kind of do everything for them. And I think it's really good for your own skills and simply to be a master of sound, to be able to build up these things yourself. Now, this tool is free. It's a tool called Bittersweet, and you can download it for free from a software company called Flux. And Bittersweet is basically, it's a transient designer. Now, there was a company called SBL that made an analog transient designer, and basically a transient designer is a net of two compressors configured in a particular, and certainly SPL have kept that hidden and trademarked, etc. But you will find transient designers around, and this one is called Bittersweet, and bitter gives you that part of the sound, and sweet kind of smooths out attacks. So if you want kind of punch at the beginning of a sound, you go for bitter. If you want something that's sweet, smooth, a bit more of a gliding on attack that you might want for a pitched instrument, then you would change this setting to sweet. But I've gone for full-on bitterness. Okay, so let's see what happens when I add that. And if I adjust that, you can hear that what it's doing is it's concentrating energy into, near to the onset of the sound. Okay, that's what transient designers typically do. Strictly, I suppose I should have shown you a network of compressors that achieve the same effect. But because this is freely available, you can download it for free. I decided that it qualified, and you would be allowed to incorporate it. I would be allowed to incorporate it in this. Okay, then a bit more shaping with EQ. And I'm sorry if you're getting some crackles and scratches. It's probably my CPU struggling to keep up with running Zoom and Reaper. But hopefully that gives you the idea. So I'll build that up again from the bottom up. But before I do that, you're probably thinking, right, well, that's all very well and good, Jez, but you weren't given an impulse. You had this. This was what you started with. So how do you justify the fact that you've used an impulse? Well, I use this to make the impulse. So if I just zoom in on this, just copy that bit there, get rid of everything else, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in, and we will do the same here. I'm just going to cut this bit out here, copy that. In fact, let's make that a little bit wider. Copy that. Select everything, delete. I'm still using the original audio. I'm just cutting it down and down so it's smaller and smaller and smaller. And there that is. And if I now zoom in, then what I can do is I can get down to sample level, delete those, and there I have an impulse. Okay, and then all I need to do is I export that as an impulse. I'm using the original audio. That's not cheating. I'm just using a tiny part of it. And an impulse in the time domain is one of the fundamental building blocks. There are only two fundamental building blocks of audio. One is an impulse in the time domain, and one is an impulse in the frequency domain. And an impulse in the time domain is very, very short, but exists at all frequencies. And an impulse in the frequency domain is in fact, it lasts for an infinite amount of time. It's very long duration, but it exists only at a tiny range of frequencies. And kind of where those two things meet in the middle is if you take a random assortment of impulses in the time domain, you get the same result as you would if you assembled a random assortment of impulses in the frequency domain. Okay, so I'm not cheating. That's where I got my impulse from. Right, let's just return our audio back to where it was and zoom out. Okay, so kick drum is done. Let's play that and hear how it builds up. Okay, next sound, clap. Where did I get that from? Now I'm noticing that there's a few messages popping up in the chat. I can't see them. I can go and look at them, but I can see you, Jack. So if you wave at me, if there's anything sort of that's relevant in the chat that you need me to have a look at.
It was actually, I was just saying, if anyone has any questions as we go through, to put them in the chat.
Right, okay.
And then we'll come to questions at the end or when there's a suitable break.
Okay, yeah, great. Right, so the clap sound. Now, I've got to say, actually, this is one of the sounds that I'm least happy with at the moment. I'd like to spend a lot more time on this, but this is what it sounds like at the moment. I'm going to turn the reverb off. Okay, so we've got some, I mean, basically, we don't have very much happening on that, apart from I've done a pitch shift. I've pitch shifted the audio. And you can also hear that it's being sent to a delay as well. So here it is without the delay. And that's without some early reflections. So we'll just keep those off for now. So how did I create that? Well, what you need to do if you want to create something like a clap sound is you need to zoom in, find a bit of noise or a bit of crackle, something a bit unpleasant to listen to, copy that, again, get rid of everything else, and then there we go. We've got something like that. Now, what I additionally did to that sound was, I think what I did was I created some distortion. So distortion typically adds high frequency components. Again, those of you that have studied audio signals with me or audio assemblage will know how that works. So we could do some hard clipping on that, push that level right down. Makes it a little bit brighter. I also applied some equalization to it. But as I said, this is the one sound that I would like to go back to and actually create more. It needs to be brighter, that's for sure. One of the things that is really good with these kind of noisy sounds is that if you distort them a lot, then you end up with a lot of high frequency energy, and that can be quite unpleasant. But you combine that with a resonant low pass filter, and you can end up with quite a satisfying sound. Let's see if we can. Okay, let's just go for it. All right, so you might just want to do that with your headphones a bit. And I'll turn this right down. Okay, so we've lost a bit of its shape. We've lost a bit of its amplitude envelope. But you get the idea of where that clap sound is coming from. I've got quite a bit to get through, so I'm not going to spend any longer on the clap sound. So we've got the clap. Then we've got a pad sound, which is this. And I think we will hear this in. We'll hear it without the reverb to start with. Okay, so. So what's going on there? So I've got an EQ and I've got a gate. So if I turn the gate off, you'll hear that we get this underlying sustained sound. Okay, and if I turn the EQ off, you will just hear that we've got a slightly muddier sound. Now the gate is being triggered by a different part. So when we use a compressor or a gate, we can either use the signal to control itself, or we can use another signal to control it. That's known as side chaining. Particularly in respective gates, it's often referred to as keying. So a keyed gate is one where it's gating one audio signal based on the activity of another one. And I can play you that because if here, and you'll see here, every different DAW, every different plugin is different, the way that they're laid out and what they call things. But for those of you that are interested in Reaper or already use it, I might as well show you where things are. This is where I choose that I want to use the side chain. I'm using the auxiliary input as opposed to the main input. And I can actually listen to it, okay? So I can click that button there and I can hear. It's our friend the impulse again, and the impulse is actually being fed from, so if I close this and go to the routing for this particular track, so the routing for the pad, it is receiving from a track called gate trigger impulses. Okay, so if we go and look for gate trigger impulses, if I was to zoom in on this, I might as well, you will see that, well, you can see this one up here. We've got another impulse there. So I'm literally using that to open and close the gate. And what I can do, of course, with a gate control is I can adjust the hold and the release to get the kind of sound that I want. And what I wanted was something which was going to have a very hard hitting attack, but then just sort of not immediately cut off once the impulse had finished, but hold on a bit and just decay gracefully. So if I switch that in, then we end up with this. What I need to do though, of course, is to turn off listening to the gate control, and we want to listen to the actual gate output. All right, so I'll switch those in and out. Now you might be thinking, okay, fine, but where did you get that original sound from? Well, this is where something known as harmonic filters comes in handy. So we have our original recording back. There we go. And now what I can do, and again, the reason I'm doing some of this in Audacity is because Audacity is free. It's really cool for some things, Audacity. It's incredibly clunky at others. I'm always amazed at how good it does, how well it does some things, and utterly perplexed by how badly it does some other things. But it's very good for doing this kind of in-place processing. So it has a processor where you can actually draw your own filter curve. And what I've done here, a little bit like what I did with the kick drum, but I've done it at multiple harmonics rather than at just one location, is I've created very narrow accentuations at 100, 200, 300, 400, sorry, 500, sorry, that's 500, that's 400, and then 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, and 10,000. So those are harmonics. That's the first harmonic, the second harmonic, the third, the fourth, the 10th, the 20th, and so on. And if and I've also set it up so that the peaks go way above 0 dB, way above where they would have been before, but the dips in between go way below. Now, these are not particularly tight filters. You can probably see that there's a blue line, which is, well, a set of blue straight lines, which is what I drew. And then you can see that there is this green line, which is the actual filter it's created. Because the filter, the length of time that the filter rings for is fixed. Okay, and what that means is you can't arbitrarily have a really narrow filter if that filter is only allowed to act over a short period of time. But anyway, let's give that a try, and then we end up with this. That's this. Filtered by this. So we apply filter peaks, very narrow peaks at those particular frequencies, and we end up with this sort of gently undulating, wafting sound, which sounds like it's pitched. So having done that, I can then export that as a WAV file, and I imported it into Reaper, and I chose to loop at one particular bit because I just like the way that it worked with the groove of what the kick drum and the snare was doing, and so we end up with this. So if I add in the other parts. Now, I will just turn the reverberation on because that's quite an important part for the pad of the pad sound. So, and the reverberation I've also created from scratch using that recording, but I'll get to how I did that in a short while. So let's have a listen to the pad on its own with its reverberation and delays, etc. Now, at the moment, you think, wow, that's a lot of reverb, Jez. Are you sure about that? That's a hell of a lot to slather on that. But rest assured, the reverb is under control because I have got a compressor applied to the reverb. I'm driving that from the... Well, let's have a look. Let's go and look in the reverb effect setup. We've got, recomp is here. And I've got basically... a very high ratio. I'm not messing about here. 21:1, quite a low threshold. And if you want to see what's feeding that, it's the auxiliary input again. So let's look at what's sending to that track. Now, when you send to reverb, you're either sending a sound to it because you want it to be reverberated, or in this case, you're sending it to the auxiliary part of that track because you want it to control the compressor. So we're interested in what's being sent in the auxiliary sense. So here's my mixer. Right, what have we got? So we're looking for things which are going into channels 3 and 4. Okay, so kick drum, that's going to 3 and 4, so that's going to the auxiliary input. The bass, anything else? No, that's it. Kick drum and bass. So now have a listen to what happens when... So we're going to hear it again, the pad on its own with the gating, but we're going to hear it in the reverb, and then I'm going to add in the kick drum. And what you'll hear is that the kick drum just basically sits on top of the reverb. And what that does is it creates this sort of glued relationship between the kick and the pad. You know, it's as if the pad and the kick drum are sort of stuck to each other. And when the kick goes down, it pushes everything down. And when it leaves, it kind of pulls everything back up again with it. That's what this sounds like. So you can hear the kick pulling the reverb down. Oh yeah, one thing I just will point out, just to give it a little bit of a difference, just at the turnaround there at the end of 8 bars, is I've just pitched up the that pad sound by 3 semitones, a minor third. So we just get the and then back down again. Okay.
Jez, we have a question in the chat, which I presume relates, Joe, to the pad sound. Did you already know what frequencies you wanted for the filter curve?
No, roughly. I looked for frequencies around 110 because that tends to be my go-to, because I know that, you know, concert pitch A440 is that's a nice round number. Otherwise, if you're looking for kind of middle C, then it's I don't know what it is, 265.3794 hertz. So A440, great. and 110 is a 2 octaves below that. So I tend to aim for that, and that gives me a reference point. And then I'm doing lots of tuning. So, yeah, one thing I haven't mentioned, and it's a really good point, is that quite often I'm tweaking the tuning of things. And the wonderful thing about workstations is, I mean, this is how easy it is just to tweak the tuning of one example of that. It doesn't even do it permanently to the audio, it just applies it to that particular instance of the audio. And I've just typed in 3 semitones pitch adjustment there. So yeah, that's a good question, and I think I know. Yeah, in fact, I can remember now what I did, and what I also did with this was I did do a pitch change, and the pitch change gives you an estimation of what it thinks the pitch is already at. And so I think then I asked it to then change it from being 101 to being 110 or something like that. Okay, so yes, that's how I did that. So lots of pitch shifting of material, definitely, to make it all work together. Otherwise, you're just going to have a cacophonous mess, definitely. Right, so I mentioned that the clap, I was a bit disappointed with the clap, and that needs a lot more work, I think. But I was super mega pleased with the bass. So let's have a listen to that. Now again, that's in lots of reverb, but the kick does help to kind of keep sitting on that. So when the kicker and bass are in together, okay, so when the pad's in, then both the kick and the bass are kind of keeping a lid on the reverb. Okay, so how did I go about creating the bass sound? Back to Audacity again. Now, there's something else that we can do with any sound that we want. Let's get rid of that. And I'm going to undo what I did before. Make sure we're back to where we were. So I'm going to zoom in on where he's saying and what you get is a waveform. Now I'm just going to cut that, take that bit of the waveform, again delete, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, that gets a bit boring after a while, so I select all, copy, that gets boring. So I select all of that, and I'll zoom out so that I can see how I'm getting on with this. So I've copied all of that, and so let's have a listen to what that sounds like. Okay, it's quite buzzy, it's quite spectrally rich. The reason for that is because I've been quite uncompromising. I haven't sort of attempted to kind of line things up nicely. I've just said that is the cycle of the waveform. You will repeat that indefinitely. And if you repeat something that quickly, then you get a pitch from it. And the more vertical pointy edges there are in the waveform, to use technical terms, the more brightness you get injected. The more things change quickly, like an impulse, the more energy you're injecting into different bits of the spectrum. Now, when you're doing subtractive synthesis, which is typically where you get those kind of classic round bowl, bowl, bowl kind of bass lines, you're using a resonant low-pass filter to achieve that, okay? But a resonant low-pass filter will only work if it's got some material, some spectral material to emphasize at its resonant peak, but also to sort of to de-accentuate above its resonant peak. So you've got to have things which are relatively bright. That's why, you know, if you do subtractive synthesis with the sine wave as the input, all you're going to do is turn the sine wave up and down. Nothing's going to happen to the timbre of the sound. You've got to have harmonics, a wide range of harmonics for filters to work. So I did, that's not exactly what I did, but I did something like that. I just took a wave cycle, wasn't that fussed about what it was. I just wanted it to be bright sounding when I'd put it together. Again, I did some pitch detection to make sure I knew how long it was, etc., what frequency it was going to be at. And then I imported it into Reaper. And let's just have a listen to the bass on its own again. And I'll do the usual of stripping back what's happening. Not the pad, the bass. So. Taking the compressor off. The time adjustment, don't worry about that. That doesn't really have much effect. What you can hear there is what I exported from Audacity, pitched down by at least 2 octaves, which is why it sounds quite different to what we were, the kind of thing that we were listening to on Audacity. And I've loaded it into Reaper's built-in sampler. And Reaper's good at many things, but its built-in sampler, I have to say, is not all that great. It's pretty limited in what it can do, but I load it in. I can adjust the pitch and semitones. I can fine-tune the pitch. I can set the attack, so we can. So I can choose how much of a kind of a bounce off there is at the end of the bass. So the sampler there's no filter built into this sampler, which is really frustrating. If you're going to do interesting things with samples, you've got to have a filter. At least I think you have. But where Reaper really does excel is in having its own programming language called JS. And basically, and again, those that have done audio signals with me on the MA, you've already tried your hand at doing some of this. Let's have a look at the code which makes up this thing called filter. So filter with an H in it, because it's a distortion device as well. So it's kind of makes things filthy and dirty, but then filters them as well. So it's called filter. Anyway, it may take a little bit of time. Yeah, here we go. So what Reaper has that no other DAW environment has is it has its own development environment within it. And this is the code that someone has written, and they shared it for free on the Reaper forum. And basically, this, I'll close that. So people who did audio signals, who had to submit some of this type of code for their assessment, are probably now looking at that going, oh my goodness, I had no idea that you could do all of this with JS. I have to say, this is one of the most impressive examples of JS programming that I've ever seen. So we'll close that and we'll see what it leads to. So basically, we have this interface here, which is it's a non-linear distortion. So this is wave shaping, essentially. Wave shaping is instantaneously mapping an input level to an output level, dependent on a curve that you show it. Now, compressors do this, but they don't do it instantaneously. So rather than generating distortion, they generate changes over time in level. But this is an instantaneous device, so this is creating distortion products. So this is sort of dirtying up, adding additional harmonic components to what I'm putting into it. But the thing that I really love, and I'm sorry, my laptop screen is a little bit too small to accommodate this in all its glory, so it's a little difficult for me to sort of work my way around it. But basically, although the sampler doesn't have a filter, this does. And you think, well, okay, but that's still not much use, because how does the filter know that a note has been pressed on the sampler? Aha! It has an onset detector. So whenever it gets an onset, it thinks, that's the start of a note. I better apply this filter envelope. So and you can choose all manner of filters. I'm currently using the low pass Voodoo filter. There are all sorts. There are emulations of Korg, Moog, all sorts going on. And it's a bit processor heavy, this, but we'll see whether, so what you can see here is what's happening to the filter position after the note starts, and that vertical line which is flying along here is showing it says, right, a note's note's been triggered, and then it carries through the envelope like so. So just to give you a quick idea, so it's pretty fat, as they say. Okay, so we've got that nice rounded resonant bottom end sound, and we've only got that because we made something which had lots of high harmonics in it. If you want to take sound away in a meaningful way in subtractive synthesis, it's got to be there in the first place. Okay, so next thing, in order to sort of to widen it, to thicken it in stereo terms, I use a delay, a configurable delay, which I've made a chorus from. Now again, those people that have done AAOP and audio signals will know that you can create chorus, flanges, etc. from a delay line. So these are the typical settings for a chorus. This is using a free delay, the sound hack, a guy called Tom Erb, working in the States, plus delay. Last time I checked, these were available for free as a suite of plugins for both Mac and Windows. So we typically set a delay time of about 20 milliseconds. We don't have any feedback, and then we modulate that delay with an LFO. And what I've done here to give us a bit of stereo width is I've offset the phases of the LFOs on the left and the right channel, so we get a bit of push-pull going on. So let's add that in. And we just get that kind of thickening, that broadening of the sound. As I say, the time adjustment doesn't really make much odds. And then just to tighten the sound a little bit, just to accentuate the attack. So I've got a very high ratio, and I can adjust the attack to give me a different shape at the onset of the sound. Okay, so far we've got okay, and just to remind you, that all came from here. Every sound that you've heard has come from okay. So next we have this sound, which is the something called barometer image. Right, so let's run that. I'm going to turn the reverb off because without the kick drum to rein it in, it does get a bit much after a while. And I'll take the delays off just to start with. Nice bright fizzy sound. Got some delays on it. So let's talk about the delays. It uses redelay, which is a pretty good delay plugin. You can have as many taps as you want, and basically what we've got this set to is 3.5 quavers, which is a 7 semi-quaver delay on one of the taps, and then 2.5 quavers, which is a 5 semi-quaver delay on the other tap. So you get this kind of constantly syncopating response to this sort of straight pattern. So I'll switch the delays out and then put them back in. So let's go into that sound and see what we have. You could probably hear that there's a gate at work. We don't have to worry about what that's doing. That's just trying to keep things in time with everything else. So I'll just strip it down. Have I done the right? Hold on. That's the wrong. I did wonder why nothing was changing, and I'm not going mad. That was the wrong track. So just bear with me. What we need is not barometer, but barometer image. Easy mistake to make. So that's just a gate and a delay. So let's see what's going on there. Okay, so that's a pretty horrific sound when it's sustained, but if you chop it up with the gate, then it becomes more palatable. It becomes almost like a sort of pitched, closed hi-hat sound. So let's have a listen to that again. Okay, so I mentioned that you can use a delay to create chorus or a flange, and now I'm creating a flange. So we have the recipe for a flange is typically a lower delay time, about 10 milliseconds. You can use feedback with a flange. Doesn't sound very good on chorus. It makes everything sound out of tune. And then we modulate that delay time again, and that's what gives us this kind of swirly movement in the sound. And again, I've got an offset between the LFO phase for the left and the right. So the LFO is the thing which is using a sine wave to slowly vary the delay times up and down. And so it's happening at different phases in the left and the right channel, which gives us a nice stereo effect. But how did I get that effect in the first place? So we're going to go to somewhere different now. I mentioned to you that I had used this image as well to create sounds for this. It's an image of a barometer. Now what happens here is that I use a process known as de-rasterization. Now that's very unusual. It's very esoteric, and in fact I came across it at a conference about 15 years ago. It was just about to finish. People had started to drift off. It was at the end of a week-long conference. I had a long flight to get back from Canada to the UK, and I was thinking, am I going to stay around for this? De-rasterization? What's that? Anyway, I did, and it was brilliant. It was such an interesting and new take on the way that you could do sound. Basically, images are made up of rows of pixels. And so what you can do is you can scan across and you can measure the value of each of those pixels. And then when you get to the end of one row, you just jump back and you scan the second row and the third row and the fourth row. And so what you're doing, it's a bit like unraveling a jumper and turning it into one straight piece of wool again. So what you're doing is you're creating a waveform by taking different layers of this sound and putting them end to end. And you can actually do it either way. You could read it as columns. So you could make your waveform out of column 1 going down, then column 2, then column 3. Now, what happens is that as it scans across, at the same point, typically, because images are quite often characterized by vertical or horizontal lines, okay? So particularly vertical lines. This is one of the reasons why images scan from left to right and not up and down, is because vertical lines are much more common in film and TV and images than horizontal lines. Why? Well, because if something is sort of pointing to, if a gate is open, then the gate post is always vertical, but because the gate is open, it's sort of diagonal. It's not horizontal unless it's closed. If that makes sense. So what happens is that we get if you imagine that all these samples are 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then we get a high value back to 0. And so what we end up with is this thing which repeats every time we scan across. And if it repeats in the same place, which it will do if it's a vertical line, then we can begin to get periodicity into our sound. So basically, and if you take this image and you take each of its rows of pixels and you align them end to end. You have to do some other things as well, because pixel values go between 0 and 255, and you want things for floating point audio inside a DAW that goes between -1.0 and +1.0. So you've got to sort of do some scaling to the data. But I've written a MATLAB script that does this. Now, MATLAB is definitely not free. My colleagues at NewGen told me when I wanted to give them some stuff in MATLAB, they said the only people that can afford to use MATLAB are universities and NASA. But the reason that universities can use MATLAB is because MATLAB wants to encourage people to use it, so that when they go out into the wide world, whether they're going to become data scientists or biologists or even music technologists and audio designers, who knows, that they are happy with MATLAB, and so therefore they urge their company to buy it. Anyway, the university has access to MATLAB, and you all, as members of the university, can download and use MATLAB for free. So I'm allowing myself this because you can use it for free. Now, those of you that have used MATLAB before, some people here have done it with me in some of my modules. That's good, but you'll know that it's a little bit daunting to use. Basically, I've created a script called Im2 Audio, which basically is short for image to audio, and all you have to do is, in the command line of MATLAB, you just have to enter that command. I should have done this with a much shorter file name, but basically all you have to do is type in the name of that command, Im2 Audio, and then the name of the picture file that you want to scan, and then what you want to call the output audio. And in this case, we want to call it barometer image. Okay, and then I just run that, and it takes the image, loads it into MATLAB, does the de-rasterization, and then stores it in an audio file. And what we end up with, and this is typically what we end up with, the kind of thing that we end up with in de-rasterized sound is we end up with a sound. This is it. This is the sound. I might have pitched it up or down a little bit to get it in time, to get it in tune with everything else, but this is it. Yuck. But if we apply a flange to it and gate it, then we get okay. Right, we are slowly getting through this, and just in case you're wondering, I'm planning to be finished by 4:30. I think 90 minutes is the sort of the maximum, isn't it, Jack? Is that right?
Yeah, that's about right. It would be good potentially at the end to leave some time for questions.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try and scoot through the rest of this. I've done most of the things that I wanted to cover. So what have we? So we've got, and then we've got the. These are just the triggers that I'm using for the gating. So we don't actually hear those, but those are driving the gates, which are shuttering the other sounds. Oh yeah, right. Next we've got this. Now, to be honest, again, this is one of those sounds where I spent a lot of time fiddling around, trying it out, and when I'd ended up, I thought, well, I'm not sure it's very interesting, but we'll go with it for now. But I will show you how I did that, and I'm actually going to show you some software. Again, it's free, which enables you to access that other fundamental building block. So I talked about impulses in the time domain, and now I'm going to show you how you can get an impulse in the frequency domain. So I'm going to load up some software called Spear. Now, Spear was the outcome of someone's PhD thesis who was doing some investigation into sinusoidal analysis and resynthesis of sounds. I'm going to load up a sound. In fact, I'm going to load up something completely different just to show you what's going on here. Okay, so I'm going to open up a sound, but what I'm going to go for is I'm going to go for audio files. I'm going to go for a single note of a violin. Yeah, there we go. Fine. And basically what it gives me is a plot of the trajectory of the different sinusoids that make this up. So there's the first harmonic, second, third harmonic, and so on. So we can see a bit more what's going on in the sound. And of course, violins, they don't just make single sinusoids, they also are quite noisy. That's what gives them their lovely, interesting texture. And you can see that as well in lots of these additional weaker sinusoids. So here we are. Right, and so basically what I can do is I can look at different tools to help me to modify this. So one of the things I can do is I can select different partials. Let me zoom in a bit more. Okay, so I can choose the first, the third. That's the first harmonic. I'm choosing the second, the fourth, the sixth. Let's go for the eighth as well, and the 10th, and then I can just delete those. And if I play that sound now, we end up with this. And we end up with a violin that sounds a little bit like a clarinet. Why does it sound like a clarinet? Well, because a clarinet predominantly has only odd harmonics, whereas a violin has even and odd harmonics. So this is the kind of thing that you can do with this editing software. But I'm going to do something different, and that is I'm going to open another sound. So we will go to here, and this is where we need our overspill, distance deviations, and so that sound that we got from the sound that we got from the reading in the, here we go, the barometer image. So if I load that in, okay, yeah, fine. It's quite a long sound, so it takes it quite a long time to analyze it. Basically what it's going to give us, because that sound is very static in terms of its pitch, it's going to give us a lot of very long straight lines, and each one of those is going to be a sinusoid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all but one of those and delete them. And then we're left with a sine wave. And that is, if it's a stationary sine wave, it doesn't change in amplitude or frequency, then that is an impulse in the frequency domain. Okay, so so what I'm going to do is I select everything apart from that. In fact, let's do everything apart from that. Okay, and I think I can probably turn this up a little bit now. Okay, just to be on the safe side, I won't go any higher than that. And if we start there. Now, I've got a sine wave, and we can do anything we want with sine waves, in the same way we can do anything we want with an impulse. So I can select that. I can paste it, and then I can grab hold of it, and I can do that with it, and then I end up with this. Oops. Okay, not a particularly clever bit of copying and pasting, because they're not harmonics of each other. So we get this kind of bell-like timbre. But additive synthesis, you can build any sound that you want within reason from using sine waves. And of course, sine waves are very good for low frequency sine waves, good for reinforcing kick drums, etc. So this is a way in which you can access impulses in the frequency domain, fixed sinusoids, which are also very useful building blocks. So I didn't actually use one of those in this particular track that I'm putting together, because that's just not the way that the track worked out. But I did import some drums, so I bounced down the drums from here. I then imported them into Spear. I then used Spear to shorten all of the individual sine waves that were making up that sound, and then re-imported them. And I ended up with this. And I also ended up with this kind of sound as well. So you'll just have to take my word for it that those came from Spear. I won't follow through all of my steps in creating those. One other thing that I did use is something called Ackizer, which is also free. And this is a recreation of the time stretching that was available in Akai hardware samplers in the early 90s. And basically, this was the original sound that I played in. Again, you might just want to pull headphones off of ears because I'm not sure if I can control the level for this. No. I haven't got individual control of the level from Ackizer. So everybody, headphones off of ears a little, please. And I'm going to play the sound now. All right? So that was something which I had created in Spear. And then I pitched it up by an octave and made it go 50% faster. And we end up with that. Just to give you an idea of the kind of thing that you can do with Ackizer, let's load up a drum loop. This is the original sound that I'd bounced down. Okay, it takes a bit of time to open up. Okay. Okay, so that's just a bounce of the drums, and you know I can do some cool things with that. If I want to slow that down so it takes twice as long. Okay, I can change the cycle length. So this is basically time stretching with lots of artifacts, but artifacts which can sound quite cool. Okay, so that's something else that is free, and again, last time I checked it was available for both Windows and Mac. Right, we're nearly getting to the end. In fact, I think we pretty much are at the end. The only thing I want to tell you about now is the reverb. Yes, I made reverb from that recording. So if we go back to the barometer recording, what I did was I looked for a bit of noise in between an utterance. So something like there. I copied it, I pasted it on top of itself a lot. Okay, so I looped it. And then what I did was I selected it. In fact, let's try this now. So I used something called pull stretch, which is quite famous for being able to give you enormous, great stretches. And so I can stretch that by 10 times. Okay, right. This is because I'm trying to do it in a hurry and I haven't copied it over. But okay, so let's do. Okay, so I've just created a stretched bit of noise. Okay, then what I do is I import that noise into Reaper. And I create a version which is pitched an octave down and a version which is pitched an octave up, because the audio is quite middly in terms of where it occupies the frequency range. So this is the original, and I've also applied an exponential decay because that's how reverb behaves. It decays exponentially. I took one copy and reversed it and put that on the other side, so I get a completely decorrelated, nice wide sounding reverberation. So that's what this sounds like. Okay, and let's take that down. Oops, no, I don't want to record, thank you. Okay, that's the middle. This is the low frequency. Now, typically reverberation is most satisfying when it's at when it's longer at low frequencies, so it's a bit longer. It's shorter at middle, and then at high frequencies where it's been pitched up, it sounds like this. Okay, together they sound like this. Now, if you bought a reverb and it sounded like that, you would take it back to whoever you bought it from. Said this doesn't seem to be working properly, and this is one of those things that would need a lot more tweaking than I've done to develop something which is a good sounding reverb. But just to show that it can be done, I have incorporated it into this reverb here. So use the convolution reverb plugin in Reaper. I load up that, so I bounce down that file from that other project, and this is what we get from it. So let's do this. Okay. If I mute the kick drum, so you can make reverberation from those kind of recordings as well. All right, let's just remind ourselves what it all sounds like. I'll switch some parts in and out. We'll have a listen to it for a couple of minutes, and then I will finish. Okay. Okay, you can hear it starting to drift out of time. Again, this is because Reaper doesn't loop very well, doesn't deal very well with plugins that have different amounts of delay when it gets looped around a particular section. If I run it back again, then it's back in time. Right, there it is. That's it. So just to remind you once more, that all came from and that picture. Okay, there we go. I will stop sharing my screen.
Amazing. That's quite extraordinary, Jez. I'm sure there are many questions that people would like to ask, and I think I'll just open up the floor kind of immediately for questions or thoughts that anyone had. Feel free to also put any questions.
Yeah, I can see a few in the chat box. I tell you what I'll do. Unless I need to play any more audio, I think what I'll do is I'll turn off original sound here so that you've got. You should now have me in both earpieces. The joys of modern stereo technology. It's amazing, isn't it? Right. Okay. So I mean, I can look at some of the questions in the shout box. So. Right, great, Jack. So you've been following up with all of these links, which is perfect. And what I can do is I can provide links to all the software that I've talked about today, so that if people want to follow up on this, then that they can do that. Right. No, it just seems to be what software is available. The question that came up about did I know what frequencies I wanted already? Yes, to a certain extent. So it's sort of what's it called? Educated guesswork, I guess you would say. One of the reasons I mentioned at the beginning that I definitely didn't want to do this as a beat the clock is because I don't do this often enough, and you would have been here for hours while I rummaged around for the settings that were going to get this. So it was easier for me just to spend a few hours yesterday putting this together, and then sort of coming back to you and saying that I'd done it. But one of the good things is it makes you think about, what a kick drum is. What frequencies does it exist at? How long does it ring for? Does it have lots of noise at the beginning, which helps to sort of define the attack, and so on. I think the more that you do this, the more you are able to access quickly the settings that are going to work. And there, as I said, there are some things that I would really like to go back and do. The clap never really worked for me. I've got good claps before by taking quite rough sounding audio, distorting it, and then applying a low pass filter to it. But that just, it didn't have the right attack really. So it ended up being quite a sort of loose and sort of laid back clap.
We have a question from Alex. I'm going to read them out if that's okay, Jez, for the sake of recording.
Yeah, go for it.
How much did you have planned out before you started? Did you know exactly what instruments you wanted to replicate? And is this something that you do often?
Okay, so it's not something that I do often. I'll go backwards. It's not something I do often. I wish I had more time to do it, because it's a really good way of refreshing your understanding of sound and how it's built up and how it's constituted. It's very tempting, and I do it all the time. I've got synthesizers behind me with gorgeous plug-in preset sounds that I just play a kind of an add 9 chord on, and it just sounds absolutely amazing. But it's good to just sort of remind yourself what are the actual textures and fabrics of sound that work and work well together. I knew that I was going to create something along house lines, because although I don't do this kind of production very much, I do DJ quite a bit. And so I know when I'm listening to records, when I'm buying records, when I put something on, I know if I like it or not. So I chose to do this particular style because I thought I could make decisions quickly about whether I liked what was happening or not. And what was the other one? So how much did I have planned? Yeah, so it was 120 BPM. That's what house, that's typical house tempo. As has been pointed out by many people, there's probably a much greater preponderance of tracks at 120 BPM than any other tempo, because simply that's the default tempo that DAWs have when you open them up. So yeah, and I knew that there were things that I wanted to demonstrate. I knew that I wanted to demonstrate what you could do with an impulse in the time domain and an impulse, a sinusoid. In the end, I didn't really use the sinusoid as I was expecting to. I was expecting to use it to reinforce a kick drum or a bass line, but didn't get there. So a bit planned, a bit random. And I'm glad there wasn't a client looking over my shoulder, because they would have got quite bored quite quickly, I think. Yeah, Jack. So Jack said he wants to try putting a reversed sample into a convolution reverb. Yeah, that should be super straightforward. All you need to do, in fact, I'm sure there is an option in Audacity to select all the waveform and then choose reverse. And in fact, I did, because the way that I got stereo reverberation was I stretched some noise, but that was in mono, and there's nothing worse than mono reverberation. So in order to get stereo reverberation, I took the noise and flipped it back to front, so that it was running back to front in one channel and the right way in the other channel, and that gave a distinct stereo effect because they were completely decorrelated. Oh, good. Yes. Yeah, we are recording it. We're recording it via multiple recorders, so hopefully one of them worked. Right. So we had a question about making reverb like that without pull stretch. I think there is a web interface for pull stretch. And I think Audacity does work on the Mac. Are you saying, Will, that pull stretch is not available in Audacity on the Mac?
I think it's just pull stretch. It's a bit temperamental on Mac. Right. I've downloaded it and tried to use it in Logic, and it's been a bit dodgy. Yeah. There's
a web interface for it. There is a it used to be you could upload sounds to the web. Let me know about that. I'm pretty sure I know how pull stretch works. I think what it does is it literally shreds audio into tiny sections and either repeats them or doesn't, and then basically does something known as phase randomization to kind of blur over the loop edges, and that's how it does it. And so I've often thought that I might try and get a Jez stretch together. So if Paul stretch isn't working, let me know and I'll see what I can come up with.
Okay, cheers.
Jez stretch would be amazing. Jez, I was wondering. Sorry, I was just wondering. A lot of the sounds that you used, you'd kind of really, quite extremely zoomed in on the original sample. And when kind of you and your friends and people that you've worked with have done this kind of scrap heap challenge exercise, do you ever kind of in your tracks refer back to the original sample as well in its kind of more literal form? Or is it always a complete kind of deviation?
That's a really good point. And in actual fact, most of the people, when I've done this as sort of a kind of friendly challenge, most other people have gone for the more macro approach. So I should point out, this is a very micro approach that I'm taking. And actually what I did want to do, because I've listened to that sample so many times now, that a rhythm, a groove, because this guy goes ba rom mi ta, ba rom, so it feels very syncopated. So if you imagine that ba rom mi ta, and it did occur to me that I would like to go and try and grab that sample and just have that. If you were going to turn this into a 5-minute track, then you could drop that in or something like that. So. Yeah, it's a good point. I've been very micro, but you can be macro, definitely. Yeah.
Do you think that's a good moment to move on to the other thing that we might want to talk about, or are you holding off?
No, I think no, that's good. That's good. You've reminded me, because I know we've only got a few minutes left to go. So we're not quite in a position to announce it as a kind of as a complete competition yet with a set of rules, but we are currently gathering some materials, a little bit like what I've been using today, and we're going to have not just as an outcome of this session, but of all of the sessions, because you've watched all sorts of people. You've watched Jack, you've watched Tim, you've watched Liam. I think we've got Ben and Jethro coming up next week doing some modular stuff and things. So this is an opportunity for you to try out some of the things that you have observed us do, but also some things that you've found out about elsewhere in your explorations of technique and technology. And we're going to set a found sound challenge where we're going to give you some audio, and the audio may be in a similar state to the sample that I used today. We might even throw in an image. And we want people just using that material. You're not allowed to use any other material. But hopefully, as I've shown, that shouldn't be too much of a constraint. We want people to show real imagination and flair in both micro and macro, taking longer sections, we as a competition. And I've managed to persuade NewGen software company to come up with some rather good prizes. So for the first prize, they're offering Paragon, which is their flagship reverb, which I worked on with them, and they're currently selling for 600 quid. I couldn't afford to buy it. So well, I mean, don't feel too sorry for me. They did give me a copy, being as I worked on it with them, but it's a lot of money. But they're offering it as a first prize, along with what they call their focus pack, which includes their stereoizer, stereo placer and mono filter plugins. For the second prize, they're offering just the focus pack. And then for the third prize, they're offering what's called their elements pack, which is a sort of cut down version of the focus pack. So the idea is that there will be a competition where we're going to give you some audio material, and we want you to demonstrate your creativity and your competence in different areas to come up with new music from this material, from these found sounds. And there will be a judging panel. It's not an assessment, so we're not going to be assessing this in the same way that we would mark a piece of work. This is a competition, slightly different, but we'll be very clear about what we're looking for and what the rules are. And we're going to invite some people from outside of the department to judge it as well, okay, as well as us. So that will be announced very soon. But that's all I can say right now. But that's a challenge for people to be working on over the end of this term and over the Easter vacation. So, yeah, that's it.
Well, what a great note to finish on, and incredibly exciting that we've got those prizes in this project available. I'm sad that I won't be able to enter that, unfortunately. But, maybe I'll fork out 600 quid for the original.
There's a stereo version coming, which is going to have the same is going to sort of have the same price ratio as the number of channels, I'm told. So it's going to be
Good.
There's going to be one aimed at musicians, which is going to be less pricey. Yeah.
Great. And on that, thank you very much, Jez. I hugely enjoyed that. I feel like I've learned a huge amount in the last hour and a half, and I'll probably go off and try and do exactly what you just did by myself. It's all new to me. So thanks very much. And
thanks everyone for coming along.
We have Liam, actually, I think, doing an Against the Clock, and then Jethro and Ben will be doing the modular stuff the following week, I think. Right. So looking forward to seeing you all there. Have a lovely weekend. Right. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Guys, that was great.
Bye.